Francis Bacon, a colossal figure in the history of thought, is widely hailed as the father of the scientific method, a title that underscores his revolutionary impact on how we understand the world. Born in London in 1561, during the vibrant Elizabethan era, Bacon was a true Renaissance man, excelling as a philosopher, statesman, lawyer, and author. His life's work was not to make specific scientific discoveries, but to completely overhaul the very methodology by which knowledge was pursued. Before Bacon, the intellectual landscape was dominated by scholasticism, a method heavily reliant on deductive reasoning and the authority of ancient texts, particularly those of Aristotle. Knowledge was often sought not through observation of nature, but through intricate logical arguments starting from pre-established principles. Bacon found this approach to be stagnant, arguing that it was better suited for winning debates than for discovering new, useful truths about reality. He famously declared, "Knowledge is power," believing that a true understanding of nature would grant humanity dominion over it for the betterment of life. In his groundbreaking 1620 work, Novum Organum, or New Instrument, Bacon laid out his new method for scientific inquiry. This new instrument was empiricism, the idea that knowledge should be built upon a foundation of sensory experience and observation. Bacon argued that before one could build new knowledge, one must first clear the mind of inherent biases and errors in thinking. He brilliantly categorized these mental obstacles into 4 groups, which he called the idols. The first, the idols of the tribe, are the inherent flaws of human nature itself. Our senses can deceive us, and we have a natural tendency to see more order and regularity in the world than truly exists. We jump to conclusions and favor evidence that confirms our existing beliefs, a concept now known as confirmation bias. The second group, the idols of the cave, refers to the personal biases of an individual. Our particular education, experiences, and passions shape our unique perspective, creating a private cave that distorts our view of reality. One person might be an optimist, another a pessimist, and this coloring affects their interpretation of the same set of facts. The third category, the idols of the marketplace, arises from the imperfections of language and communication. Words can be ambiguous or poorly defined, leading to endless disputes that are about semantics rather than substance. Bacon warned that we can become enslaved by the very words we invent to understand the world. Finally, the idols of the theater are the errors that stem from established philosophical and scientific systems. These systems, like elaborate stage plays, present a fictional, neatly constructed world that is accepted without question. Bacon saw the philosophies of Aristotle, Plato, and others as such theatrical productions, captivating but ultimately misleading. To counteract these idols, Bacon proposed a new, disciplined method of inquiry. This method, known as the Baconian method, is inductive in nature. It begins not with abstract principles, but with meticulous and systematic observation of the natural world. The scientist, according to Bacon, should be a neutral collector of facts. He advocated for the creation of vast tables of discovery to organize these observations. One table would list instances where a phenomenon occurs, table of presence. Another would list instances where the same phenomenon is absent, table of absence. A third table would track the variations or degrees of the phenomenon, table of degrees. By carefully analyzing these tables, the investigator could slowly and cautiously infer the true nature, or form, of the phenomenon. This was a painstaking, bottom-up process, moving from specific facts to general axioms, rather than the other way around. Bacon stressed the importance of experimentation, of actively putting nature to the question. Passive observation was not enough. One had to manipulate variables to see what would happen. This emphasis on active experimentation is a cornerstone of modern scientific practice. Bacon's vision for science was also collaborative and institutional. In his utopian novel, The New Atlantis, he described a fictional research institution called Salomon's House. This imaginary college of scientists was a blueprint for the future of organized, state-sponsored research. Many historians believe that Bacon's writings directly inspired the formation of the Royal Society of London in 1660. The Royal Society's motto, nullius in verba, take nobody's word for it, perfectly encapsulates Bacon's empirical spirit. Despite his immense intellectual contributions, Bacon's political career was marked by a dramatic rise and fall. He served under Queen Elizabeth II and later rose to become Lord High Chancellor of England under King James I, the highest legal office in the kingdom. However, in 1621, he was charged with corruption, accused of accepting bribes in his capacity as a judge. Bacon admitted to the charges, though he maintained he had never allowed the gifts to influence his judgment. He was fined, imprisoned in the Tower of London, and permanently disgraced from holding public office. His imprisonment was brief, but his political life was over, allowing him to dedicate his final years entirely to his philosophical work. There's a famous, though likely apocryphal, story about his death. In the winter of 1626, he was supposedly struck with the idea of using snow to preserve meat. He stopped his carriage, bought a fowl, and stuffed it with snow to test his hypothesis. The legend says he caught a chill from the experiment, developed bronchitis, and died shortly after. If true, it would be a fitting end for the ultimate champion of hands-on experimentation. Bacon's legacy is monumental, not because he was a great scientist, but because he was the great propagandist for science. He provided the philosophical foundation and the methodological rigor that allowed the scientific revolution to flourish. Figures like Isaac Newton, Robert Boyle, and Galileo Galilei, whether they knew it or not, were working within the intellectual framework he had constructed. He was the one who drew the blueprint for the modern scientific enterprise. His insistence on empirical evidence, skepticism, and methodical inquiry remains the gold standard in scientific research today. Every time a researcher formulates a hypothesis, conducts an experiment, and analyzes data, they're walking in Bacon's footsteps. He fundamentally shifted the goal of philosophy from contemplating divine truths to understanding and controlling the material world. This practical, utilitarian view of knowledge has been a driving force behind technological and material progress for centuries. However, Bacon is not without his critics. Some argue that his method is too mechanical and underestimates the role of creative leaps and hypotheses in scientific discovery. Science is not just about collecting facts, it is also about imaginative conjecture. Others point to the potential negative consequences of his call to establish dominion over nature. This ambition, some environmentalists argue, has led to an exploitative relationship with the planet. Despite these valid critiques, Bacon's central role in shaping the modern world is undeniable. He was the prophet of a new age, an age of empirical investigation and technological ambition. His work cleared the path for the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution. Francis Bacon's enduring legacy is the very idea of progress, the belief that through reason and inquiry, humanity can continuously improve its condition. He taught us not what to think, but how to think. And that, ultimately, is a far more powerful gift. The scientific method is his immortal contribution to civilization. Bacon's philosophy was a direct assault on the intellectual traditions of the past. He argued that science should be useful and serve the needs of humanity. This contrasted with the classical view of philosophy as a purely contemplative activity. His method required a form of intellectual humility. One had to abandon preconceived notions and approach nature with a beginner's mind. Bacon compared the true scientist to a bee, not an ant or a spider. The ant merely collects and uses. The spider makes cobwebs out of his own substance. But the bee takes a middle course. It gathers its material from the flowers of the garden and of the field, but transforms and digests it by a power of its own. This metaphor perfectly illustrates his synthesis of observation and rational processing. He envisioned a future where scientific knowledge would be systematically catalogued. This idea prefigures our modern world of databases and shared scientific information. Bacon's writing style was as influential as his ideas. He was a master of the aphorism, crafting des. Memorable sentences packed with meaning. His essays are a treasure of worldly wisdom and concise prose. The separation of science from theology was a crucial step he advocated. He argued that the book of God's Word, the Bible, and the book of God's works, nature, should be studied separately. This helped to create a space for free scientific inquiry without the immediate threat of heresy. Bacon was not an atheist. He saw science as a way to appreciate the glory of God's creation. He famously wrote, "A little philosophy inclineth man's mind to atheism, but depth in philosophy bringeth men's minds about to religion." His influence extended across the Atlantic to the American colonies. Thinkers like Thomas Jefferson were deeply influenced by Bacon's empiricism and his division of knowledge. Bacon's classification of knowledge into history, poetry, and philosophy formed the basis for many library systems. He was a complex man, a blend of medieval and modern thinking. He believed in alchemy and astrology, yet he forged the tools that would eventually disprove them. This paradox shows the difficulty of escaping one's own historical context, one's own idols of the theater. The pursuit of a single, perfect method for science is now seen as overly simplistic. Yet, the core spirit of his project, skepticism, observation, and verification, remain. He was a visionary who saw the immense potential locked within the systematic study of the natural world. His work was a declaration of independence for the empirical sciences. By championing the inductive method, he empowered future generations to build knowledge from the ground up. Francis Bacon's revolution was one of the mind, and its echoes are still shaping the future of human knowledge.